I was 17 when I realized I wasn't part of a family. I was part of a support system. My name's Simon. I'm 28 now, but back then, I was just a teenager who believed that hard work and good grades could earn you a ticket to a better life. I was the kind of kid who fixed old computers for fun, built websites in my free time, and stayed up watching YouTube tutorials about ethical hacking while everyone else my age was glued to Netflix. IT was my world. It made sense to me. It felt like something I could actually build a future with. And for a long time, I thought my parents saw that too. But things started shifting around my junior year of high school. It wasn't sudden. It was subtle at first. The way my parents' eyes would glaze over when I talked about learning Python, or how they'd interrupt my excitement over building a custom PC with something about how not everyone can afford to play around with toys. Still, I brushed it off. They were old school. Immigrant mindset. Stability mattered more than passion. I figured I just had to prove it could work. So I worked harder. Got into a competitive summer coding program. Landed a paid internship doing back-end development for a small company downtown. I was on track to get a scholarship. I thought, finally, they'd see this wasn't just a hobby. It was my future. And then came my brother, Daniel. He's 4 years older than me and the definition of a golden child. Everything about him was loud. His voice, his clothes, his plans. If I was the quiet one who calculated before I moved, Daniel jumped first and figured it out midair. That might have been admirable if he ever learned from the crashes. But he didn't. Daniel had this way of turning every mistake into someone else's fault. Failed a class? The professor had it out for me. Lost his job? They didn't understand my potential. Got dumped. She was intimidated by my drive. And my parents bought it. Every single time. When Daniel dropped out of business school to become an entrepreneur, my mom threw him a party. When he moved back home 6 months later after burning through his savings on a failed sneaker flipping scheme, my dad loaned him $5,000 and told him it was just a stepping stone. Meanwhile, I was told to keep my college applications modest. Don't get ahead of yourself, my mom said one night while we were cleaning the kitchen. You're smart, Simon, but we can't afford something fancy. I remember standing there, my hands still wet from rinsing plates, staring at her like she'd just slapped me. What about the scholarship? I asked. I have a shot. Full ride. She dried her hands, not looking at me. Daniel might need help with some startup costs. He's close to something big. Startup costs. For Daniel. Again. That night I sat on my bed with my acceptance letter to a top-tier IT program in one hand and my part-time job schedule in the other, trying to calculate how much it would take to move out early, if it came to that. I didn't want to believe it yet. I didn't want to believe my own parents would block me from opportunity just to feed my brother's next half-baked dream. But that belief started crumbling fast. The final straw came 2 weeks before decision day. My internship supervisor had recommended me for a tech grant, $10,000 to cover tuition and living expenses if I committed to studying full-time in the city. It was everything I needed. I ran home after school, practically shaking with excitement, and told my parents over dinner. I'll never forget the way my dad looked at me. Not proud, not impressed, just annoyed. That kind of money could really help Daniel get his business off the ground, he said, without even glancing up from his plate. I laughed. I thought he was joking. I earned this, I said, the grin still stuck on my face but starting to slip. I worked for it. It's mine. But you're still under our roof, my mom chimed in. You don't need the money as much as your brother does. I stared at them. My own parents. Like I was talking to strangers. He's 21, I said slowly. He's already had more chances than most people get in a lifetime. And he blew them. That's not fair, my dad said sharply. You've always had it easier. You're the quiet one. The smart one. Daniel struggles more. And there it was. The root of everything. My success wasn't something to be celebrated. It was ammunition against me. Evidence that I didn't need support, because Daniel needed it more. Because Daniel struggled. Because I was fine. That night, I packed my laptop, my acceptance letter, and a week's worth of clothes. I texted my friend Adam. His older sister had an empty room in her apartment near campus, and asked if the offer to crash there still stood. It did. I didn't tell my parents where I was going. I didn't leave a note. I didn't even take the charger for my toothbrush. I walked out the door without looking back. For the first few weeks, they didn't call. I don't know if they were angry or just expected me to come crawling back. But I didn't. I started school. I found a part-time job at an IT help desk. I lived lean, learned fast, and carved out a life for myself that was entirely mine. The silence from home stretched into months, then a year, then more, and I thought that was the end of it. Until last year. Out of the blue, I got a Facebook message from my mom. It was short, cold, just one sentence. Daniel needs your help. I didn't respond. A week later, another message. This time from my dad. We need to talk. It's about your brother. Still, I stayed silent. And then came the phone call. A number I didn't recognize, but something in me said pick up. So I did. Simon. My mother's voice cracked through the static, and for a second, I almost didn't recognize it. Daniel is in trouble. Real trouble. He made some business decisions. I cut her off. I'm not giving him money. She paused. Then, more forcefully, we're not asking. We're telling you. You're his brother. He needs $120,000, and you're in a position to help. I felt the blood drain from my face. $120,000. From me. I hadn't spoken to them in 6 years. They hadn't once asked how I was doing, hadn't attended my graduation, never even acknowledged the startup I built from scratch after college. And now they wanted 6 figures? Like I was their backup plan? I took a deep breath. My voice was steady when I answered. What exactly happened? And as she began to explain, halting, defensive, half-blaming market changes and shady partners, I opened my laptop and pulled up Daniel's latest social media posts. Champagne bottles. New cars. A business trip in Dubai. This wasn't an emergency. This was a cleanup job for another one of Daniel's disasters. And they thought I'd foot the bill. But this time, I wasn't 17. And this time, I wasn't walking away. I was going to respond. I didn't sleep the night after that call. Not because of the money. I had the money. Years of contract gigs, smart investments, living below my means, and building a modest cybersecurity firm with a small team of loyal, brilliant misfits had finally paid off. The number didn't scare me. What kept me awake was the bitter taste of the past resurfacing, the way my mother said, we're not asking. We're telling you. Like I owed them something. Like I was a vault they could just unlock when Daniel torched another opportunity. It wasn't the first time they acted like I didn't get a say. But something about this felt different. Sharper. Louder. Final. I didn't answer any more of their calls that week. My mom left a voicemail every morning. Some pleading, some guilt-tripping, and a few where she didn't even bother hiding the frustration in her voice. Simon, you're being dramatic. You've always been sensitive. I stopped listening to them halfway through. By day 5, they switched tactics. My dad emailed me a PDF, some kind of half-baked investment pitch Daniel had written, full of vague promises, stock images, and fake revenue projections. At the bottom of the document, scribbled in a scanned signature box, was my name. Typed. Not signed. Typed. They were already pitching me as a backer to someone. My hands shook as I sat back in my office chair, reading the email again. It was addressed to someone named Kyle P., who apparently worked in venture capital. My dad's message read, "We've secured interest from Simon W., founder of RenSEC. He'll be providing seed funding and tech advisory." My mouth went dry. This wasn't a request anymore. They were using my name, without my permission, pretending I had agreed to bankroll Daniel's newest disaster. That night I called Adam, my old roommate. We hadn't lived together in years, but we still grabbed lunch every other week, kept each other grounded. He picked up on the second ring. "What's up, man? I think my parents committed fraud." He blinked at me. On the video call, not sure if I was joking. I wasn't smiling. When I explained everything, starting from the phone call to the fake investment email, he just shook his head slowly, then let out a low whistle. "Dude, you need to shut that down. Fast." I already had my lawyer on retainer. I forwarded everything to her, along with a warning to get ahead of any misuse of my name in official documents. But even with legal steps in motion, something in me cracked open that night. Not just anger. Something older. Deeper. Something that had been lying dormant since the day I left home. It wasn't just that they were trying to steal from me now. It was that they always believed they were entitled to my future. Even back then, I started digging through my old email, ones I hadn't opened in years. College admissions. Financial aid records. A string of scholarships I was offered, and then withdrawn. I thought I had just missed the deadlines. But no. I found one message from my high school counselor that chilled me. "Hi, Simon. Just confirming your parents declined the Bright Code Foundation grant on your behalf. They mentioned you'd be pursuing a different path." I sat there, staring at the screen. They had declined the $10,000 grant. Behind my back. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't just been paranoid. They sabotaged me. On purpose. To funnel that money to Daniel. And now, they were trying again. Bigger this time. Louder. I couldn't unsee it anymore. They never believed in me. Not really. I was just the fallback plan for when Daniel failed again. It all started making sense. The way my laptop mysteriously went missing the week before I had a coding competition in high school. How they refused to sign the FAFSA forms for my college, claiming they needed time to think. Why my mom once guilted me into giving Daniel my savings account PIN to help him fix a mistake he made with his bank. I wanted to believe they were just naive. But this wasn't naivety. This was manipulation. That weekend, they showed up at my office. I was working late, headphones on, zoning out with security logs and analytics dashboards when I saw movement in the reflection of my monitor. I turned, and there they were. My mom and dad, standing at the glass door. No warning. No call. Just there. I buzzed them in out of reflex. They walked in like they owned the place. "Simon," my dad said, like nothing was wrong. "We figured it'd be better to talk face to face." I stood up. I didn't say anything. My mom took a step forward, wringing her hands. "Honey, we didn't mean to upset you. But Daniel's in a really difficult situation. He trusted the wrong people. It's not his fault." I crossed my arms. "You forged my name on a pitch deck." "It wasn't forged," my dad said defensively. "We typed it. It was just to show confidence. We knew you'd come around eventually." My jaw clenched. "That's not how this works. You don't get to decide my involvement." My mom's eyes narrowed. "After everything we've done for you?" I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. "You mean all the support you gave Daniel? All the chances? The way you cut my legs out from under me every time I had a shot?" "You were fine," she snapped. "You always figured things out." "No thanks to you." We stared at each other across the room. All the pretense is gone now. Then she said the words that made my blood run cold. "You owe us, Simon." My mouth went dry. "Oh, you. You wouldn't be where you are if we hadn't raised you, fed you, sacrificed for you," she said, voice rising. "You think you did this all on your own?" My dad chimed in, quieter but firmer. "Daniel's your brother. Family helps family. That's how it works." "No," I said quietly. "That's how you work. You help Daniel. You use me." My mom's voice cracked, a mix of disbelief and offense. "We did everything we could for you. You've always been ungrateful." And there it was. That word. Ungrateful. The final insult. The one they'd used my whole life anytime I dared to ask for something I'd earned. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just walked over to the door and opened it. "You need to leave." They stared at me like I'd slapped them. My dad's face darkened. "You're really doing this?" "Yes." My mom's voice wobbled. "Then don't bother calling when you need us." I stared back, calm. "I haven't needed you since the day I left." They walked out. No hug. No goodbye. And for a second, I thought that was the end of it. But I was wrong. 3 days later, I got a letter. Registered mail. A formal request. From Daniel's lawyer. Claiming I had committed to financial support, and they were seeking arbitration for failure to follow through on a verbal agreement. They were suing me. For $120,000. And that was the moment. Right there, holding that ridiculous letter in my hands, heart pounding like a drum, that I knew the old version of me, the kid who wanted to believe his family just didn't understand him, was gone. They weren't confused. They weren't misinformed. They were predators. And I was finally done playing nice. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into my desk drawer. Then I opened a new document on my computer. I started writing. Not just a legal response. Not just a countersuit. But something bigger. I had 6 years of silence. 6 years of receipts. Emails, bank transfers, scholarship withdrawals, signed forms they'd tampered with. Everything. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to expose everything. There's a kind of silence that settles over you when your own family turns against you in broad daylight. Not the quiet of solitude. Solitude has peace in it. No, this silence is heavier. It hums in your chest. It makes the hours slower. Food loses its taste. Time becomes water, slipping past your fingers no matter how tightly you try to hold on. That was me for the first week after receiving the lawsuit. I stopped responding to emails. Let my team handle the day-to-day. My startup, Ren SEC, had just closed a round of funding, and my partners kept checking in, gently at first. "Hey, all good?" Then more concerned. "Want to hop on a call?" "You've been quiet." But I had no words. The letter from Daniel's lawyer sat in my desk drawer like a cursed object. Every time I opened it, it whispered all the things I'd buried years ago. You don't matter. You're just the safety net. You'll always come second to him. For a few days, I actually wondered if maybe I was overreacting. Maybe my mom was right. Maybe I had been too cold, too unforgiving. After all, they raised me, put food on the table, kept the lights on. Couldn't that count for something? But then I'd remember how they snuffed out every spark I tried to light. How they made me choose between family and future. And how, even now, after 6 years of silence, they couldn't come back with love. Only expectation. Only demands. I hit a kind of emotional rock bottom that week. Not the kind that makes you spiral outward, but the kind that makes you close in on yourself. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped moving. Until I got a package. No return address. Inside was a crumpled hoodie. Old, faded. The one I used to wear all through high school. The back still had the fraying patch of a wolf howling at the moon. My first ever embroidery, stitched by hand. Beneath it, a small piece of paper. One sentence. Don't let them shrink you again. No signature. But I knew who sent it. Melissa. We weren't close anymore. Life had pulled us in different directions. But once upon a time, she was the only person who saw me when no one else did. My childhood best friend. The only one who cheered at my high school graduation while my parents sat stiff and silent. She was the one who hugged me after I moved out, whispering, "You'll do more without them than you ever could with them." We lost touch after she moved states, but we never stopped watching each other's lives from afar. That hoodie, that note, it flipped a switch in me. I remembered who I was, what I'd built, what I'd survived, and I decided I wasn't going to let them take any more of me. So I got to work. First, I called my lawyer and greenlit a full-scale response. We filed a countersuit for defamation and attempted fraud. I sent her every email, every screenshot, every document. The forged pitch deck, the grant they declined, the fake verbal agreement. I even gave her access to an old folder I'd titled "Just in Case" back when I was 19 and paranoid enough to save every text where my parents guilt me into sending Daniel money. She didn't say much, but the pause on the other end of the line spoke volumes. "This isn't just a defense," she said finally. "This is a pattern." Exactly. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to document everything. And while the legal wheels turned, I turned inward. I started walking more. Not just around the block, but full 2-hour treks through the edge of the city, noise-canceling headphones in, listening to music I hadn't touched since college. I went back to the basics, my code. I rewrote parts of RenSEC's core engine from scratch, just for fun. It reminded me why I started building in the first place. At night, I journaled. Not the polished kind. The ugly, raw, unfiltered kind. Anger poured out of me in ink. Grief, too. Not just for the parents I never really had, but for the version of me that still hoped, deep down, that one day they'd say sorry. That they'd admit they were wrong. But some people never do. And the sooner you accept that, the freer you become. Word of the lawsuit spread faster than I expected. It didn't go viral or anything, just quiet ripples through the industry. Investors got wind of it. A few backed off. I don't blame them. No one wants to fund drama. But something surprising happened too. Other founders started reaching out. One guy, Eli, who ran a competitor I used to hate watch on LinkedIn, messaged me directly. "Hey, saw what's going on. Went through something similar with my uncle last year. If you ever want to grab coffee and swap horror stories, I'm around." We did meet for coffee. Then another. And before I knew it, Eli and I were talking about a merger, joining forces to create a stronger suite of cybersecurity products. What started as commiseration turned into strategy, resilience, business synergy. Whatever you want to call it, it worked. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. I felt equal. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling. Not because of me, because of him. Turns out, his new company wasn't a real LLC. Just a bunch of domain names and fake testimonials. His supposed investors were all friends he promised payouts to. He even listed a celebrity on his site as a strategic advisor, without permission. That one got him a cease and desist within a week. His girlfriend dumped him. His landlord sued him for back rent. And one by one, the people he'd charmed started waking up to the truth. But the thing that really cracked the mask? A podcast. A niche finance show he went on to pitch his business. He tried to talk big, buzzwords, fast-talking, fake metrics. But the host, a former forensic accountant, started pressing. Can you provide proof of revenue? What exactly does your product do? Why is your investor listed as TBD? The clip went viral, not because he bombed, but because he melted. Live. On air. Mid-interview. The comments were brutal. I didn't laugh. I didn't even smile. I felt hollow. Watching him fall apart wasn't satisfying. But it was revealing. Daniel wasn't just a failure. He was a mirror. A distorted version of what I could have been if I hadn't fought to break away. That realization gave me something I didn't expect. Peace. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. But peace. I stopped waiting for justice to feel like revenge. Justice is boring. Quiet. Paper trails and signatures and lawyers in suits. Revenge is fire. Flash. Noise. But justice? Justice is when you go to sleep knowing you're safe from the people who once controlled you. And that's what I wanted. One night, I went to a rooftop bar with a few friends from my early startup days. We laughed, talked about everything except work. And as the city lights blinked below us, one of them raised a glass and said, "To Simon, who built an empire and didn't lose his soul." It hit me harder than I expected, because for the first time, I believed it. I had spent years believing I was only successful because I escaped my family. But maybe, just maybe, I was successful because I chose myself. Every day, even when it was hard, even when it meant walking away from people who swore they loved me, but only on their terms. I looked around that night, at the people who chose me without strings, without conditions, and I realized something. After the lawsuit officially collapsed, once my lawyer proved there was no verbal agreement, no signed contract, and that Daniel's entire pitch was based on fraudulent claims, they went quiet. My parents. Daniel, the lawyer who filed the bogus paperwork on their behalf. Not a single word from them after the judge dismissed the case with a warning about malicious litigation. But silence from people like them is never peace. It's plotting. So I stayed ready. I wasn't about to walk away again, not this time. Because something had changed in me. For years I had trained myself to survive, to escape, to rebuild. But now, I had leverage. Not just money, not just success. I had the truth. And I had proof. 6 years worth of documents, emails, financial receipts, and texts. Evidence of every manipulation, every lie, every time they cut me off at the knees and handed Daniel a boost instead. And here's the thing. I never collected it with revenge in mind. But now I saw it for what it really was. A blueprint. A roadmap to justice. Because Daniel wasn't just reckless. He was dangerous. He had a pattern, building fake companies, taking money under false pretenses, and then leaving others to pick up the pieces. My parents weren't just enabling him. They were partners. Willfully blind when it suited them, willfully cruel when it didn't. I wasn't going to let them use anyone else the way they tried to use me. So I started planning. It began quietly. A weekend trip back to my hometown under the guise of visiting an old teacher. But really, I wanted to see their world. Not from the outside. From within. What were they up to now? What stories were they spinning? What I saw confirmed everything. Daniel had reinvented himself again. This time as a business recovery consultant. He rented a small storefront near downtown. A sleek black logo with the words, Redline Ventures. We get you back on track. His website looked clean. Professional. Until you looked closer. The testimonials were fake. The success stories were plagiarized. The photos of clients were stolen from LinkedIn. I knew the signs. I had audited enough shady startups in my cybersecurity days to recognize a scam when I saw one. He even listed a new set of investors, one of whom was just a photo of a finance influencer with a different name slapped under it. Worse, he was targeting desperate people. I sat at a coffee shop across the street for 3 hours and watched. People walked in alone, left with glossy folders and hopeful eyes. Entrepreneurs, single mothers, laid-off workers looking to rebuild. And I knew, he was selling them nothing. The fury came back. Sharp, clean. But I didn't let it drive me. This time, I let it fuel a plan. I started making calls. First, I reached out to Eli, my now business partner after our companies merged. He was skeptical at first. You sure you want to stir this up again? He asked during a late-night Zoom. Yes, I said. Because it's not just about me anymore. I showed him everything. The fake LLC filings, the stolen website assets, the doctored reviews. At first, he was just quiet. Then, he leaned forward and said, "Okay, let's do this the right way. He looped in his head of compliance, a sharp, quiet woman named Rena who once shut down a fishing ring impersonating major banks. She took one look at Daniel's operation and said, "This guy's an idiot. He's breaking laws in 3 states." Exactly. Next, I contacted a journalist I once helped with a piece on tech scams. Her name was Anika, young, ambitious, with a bite to her writing that made CEOs flinch. We met for coffee. I laid it out for her. The whole story. Not just the business fraud, but the family history, the manipulation, the fake lawsuit. She took notes in silence. When I finished, she looked up and said, "This isn't just a story. It's a series." We agreed to keep my name off it, for now. I wasn't doing this for publicity. I wanted exposure, not attention. But I wasn't done yet. I needed to know how far Daniel had gone, who else he'd hurt. So I created a burner identity, complete with a fake startup, website, and LinkedIn presence. Then I reached out to Daniel directly through his Redline Ventures site. Claimed I was launching a new crypto payment platform. Said I had some quiet capital and needed strategic consulting. Asked if he was available for a private retainer. He replied within 2 hours. Eager, overconfident, hungry. We scheduled a meeting. He asked to do it via Zoom, so I hired a friend of mine, a professional actor with a tech background, to pose as me. We briefed him, gave him a script, and recorded the whole thing. Daniel promised the moon. "I can make sure you get funding in under 3 months, he said. "You'll need to wire me an upfront fee, of course, $7,000 for the basic tier, $12,000 for premium. That gives you direct access to my network." "Can I talk to one of your other clients?" the actor asked. Daniel smiled. "They're all under NDA. Of course they were. By the end of the call, he had promised partnerships with fake VCs, made up connections to a guy at Y Combinator, and even claimed that I, Simon Wolf, was one of his success stories. That was the nail in the coffin. He was still using my name, still selling the illusion that I owed my success to him. I sent the recording to Rena. She replied 10 minutes later, "This is gold." We now had enough for criminal charges, wire fraud, business impersonation, attempted extortion, defamation, and more. But before we took it to the authorities, I wanted to do something else. Something personal. I wanted Daniel to know it was me. So I sent him an email. Short. Cold. Subject: "You should have stopped at lying to mom and dad. I'm not 17 anymore. See you soon. Simon." No reply. Not immediately. But 3 days later, I got a call from my mother. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with fury. "How dare you drag your brother through the mud? After everything we've done for you? You're trying to ruin his life over a misunderstanding? You always were vindictive, Simon." I deleted it. She didn't get it. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about accountability. About drawing a line so deep they couldn't ever cross it again. Anika's article series dropped 2 weeks later. Part 1. The Grifter Next Door. Inside the Fake Empires of Redline Ventures. The first piece went viral. The second one named Daniel directly. The third one dug into the family angle, lightly, respectfully, but enough to show the pattern. Within a month, Daniel's business was shuttered. His lease was revoked. His name blacklisted from multiple investor circles. Complaints flooded into the state's attorney office. And then the subpoenas started. But I wasn't watching it like a soap opera. I had work to do. Because while Daniel's empire crumbled, mine grew stronger. Eli and I finalized our Series B funding. We brought on 2 new advisors. RenSEC 2.0 launched with an AI security module that went viral in the dev community. I hired 3 of the people Daniel had tried to scam, real talent with nowhere to go, and gave them positions with purpose. And quietly, behind the scenes, I began drafting something else. Something Daniel would never see coming. Not a lawsuit. Not another article. Something older. Something closer to home. Because there was one piece left to this puzzle. One final setup. The house my parents lived in, the one they always claimed was ours, the family home, wasn't actually theirs. It was mine. Not legally. Not yet. But it could be. And I knew exactly how to do it. I didn't want cold. I didn't want rage or fire or spectacle. I wanted precision. Clean. Undeniable. Final. And for that, I needed patience. The house had always been a symbol. Not just of control, but of hypocrisy. My parents called it the family home. But it was never about family. It was about Daniel. Every decision made under that roof, from who got what for dinner to who deserved to go to college, revolved around him. I was just the background noise, the fallback, the one who didn't need help. But I remembered something important in the middle of the lawsuit madness. Back when I was 17 and about to move out, my parents forced me to sign over a small life insurance policy my grandfather had left me. It wasn't huge, $30,000 or so, but it was supposed to help me with school. Instead, they said Daniel needed it more. I was still too young to push back, legally. I was angry, but I let it go. What I didn't know then was how much more my grandfather had done behind the scenes. A few months after Anika's article series came out, I got a call from a lawyer named Henry Callow. Old school, proper, the kind of man who still wore cufflinks on Zoom. He represented the estate of my late grandfather, who had passed a few years after I moved out. Apparently, he'd been keeping tabs on the family from a distance, even while he was alive. "I'm sorry it took so long to reach you," Henry said. "Your grandfather left very specific instructions about when this information was to be shared. He knew your parents, favored your brother. He didn't want his final wishes to be manipulated." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "He put the family home into a silent trust before he passed. It wasn't your parents' house to begin with, Simon. He held the title. And upon your 28th birthday, provided certain conditions were met, it passes to you." My heart stopped. Henry continued, calm as ever. "You're 28 now. You met the conditions. And the property is yours." For a moment, I just sat there, staring out the window. I could see the city skyline from my condo, clean lines, glittering lights, everything I'd built without them. And now the house. The one thing they clung to. The thing they believed would always be theirs. It was mine. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. The revenge wasn't about the house. It was about taking back everything they'd stolen from me, choice by choice. So I didn't rush. I waited. Waited until Daniel had burned every bridge, until the investigation into his fake company had gone public, until his accounts were frozen and his credit lines shut down. Then I acted. The eviction notice was delivered on a rainy Tuesday. Official, legal, cold as ice. They had 60 days to vacate. The screaming started before I even stepped out of the car. My mother stood on the porch, holding the paper like it was a snake. "What is this? What is this?" I walked up the drive in silence. My father came out next, jaw tight. "You can't do this, Simon. You're not serious." "I'm very serious." Daniel wasn't there. He'd moved back in 6 months earlier after his business tanked, sleeping in the basement like some failed prophet. "This is our home," my mother spat. "You can't just take it from us." I pulled out the deed. My name on it. My signature. My grandfather's final will. "You never owned it," I said. "Grandpa did. And now I do." "But this is where we raised you," she cried. I didn't flinch. "No. This is where you used me." My dad stepped forward. "You ungrateful little." "Careful," I said flatly. "That kind of talk might get you kicked out sooner." He froze. The weight of it hit all at once. They were out of options. No more control. No more manipulation. No more Daniel-shaped excuses. Just consequences. 60 days came and went. They tried everything. Legal appeals. Emotional voicemails. Even dragged an old family friend into calling me to talk some sense into you. But nothing stuck. The law was clear. And I had the paper trail. The day they moved out, I didn't go. I didn't need to. Rena, the compliance officer, texted me a photo. A moving truck parked outside, my father pacing with a cigarette, my mother sitting on the curb with her head in her hands. Daniel wasn't in the frame. He'd already left. Rumor had it he fled the state, trying to reinvent himself yet again, this time in Florida, using a variation of his name. Didn't matter. I had made sure his history followed him. I didn't sell the house. Not right away. Instead, I renovated it. Tore down the walls that held memories of slammed doors and whispered arguments. Ripped out the old carpet my parents refused to replace because Daniel might spill something again. Repainted every surface. Rewired the basement. Turned his old lair into a soundproof home theater, just because I could. Then I donated it to a nonprofit that helped foster kids aging out of the system. They turned it into a transitional home, clean, safe, with job counseling and tech resources. I even set up a small scholarship fund for any resident interested in IT. That was the part that mattered. Not just taking back what was mine, but transforming it into something better, something good, something they could never touch again. I never spoke to my parents after that. Not once. They tried a few more times. Birthday cards with vague apologies. Christmas texts with smiley face emojis. A desperate email from my mom asking if I'd be willing to forgive and move on. But you can't move on from people who never admit what they've done. You just move past them. Years went by. RenSEC expanded to 3 offices. Eli and I were invited to speak at a national cybersecurity summit. My old hoodie, the one Melissa mailed me, was framed and hanging in my office, next to the first dollar I ever made writing code. I built a new family from scratch. People who believed in me. People I chose. And on quiet nights, when the city buzz faded and the memories tried to crawl back in, I'd remind myself of one thing. The most powerful thing I ever did wasn't escaping them. It was refusing to let them rewrite the story. They tried to define me as the afterthought, the fallback, the quiet one who'd figure it out. But I did more than figure it out. I thrived. Without them. In spite of them. And when the time came, I took back everything. Because in the end, the kid they tried to silence was the only one listening. I knew the speech was going to sting the second my dad tapped his fork against the glass. He stood, cleared his throat like a man about to deliver a eulogy, and gave that crooked half-smile he reserved for weddings, funerals, and moments where he got to pretend he was proud of me. I was seated at the far end of the table, surrounded by the clatter of silverware and polite clinks of wine glasses. My name is Lark. I'm 28, and 3 days ago, I got promoted to senior lead architect at a firm that, until recently, didn't even have someone under 35 in that role. I'd worked hard for it. I'm talking sleepless nights, caffeine-induced heart palpitations, deadlines so tight I nearly moved into my office. So this dinner? It was supposed to be a celebration. My celebration. Imagine, Dad said, swirling his wine with a dramatic pause. Just imagine what our Lark could have achieved if he weren't so lazy. There was laughter. Chuckles from aunts who barely knew what I did for work. Forced smiles from cousins who came for the free food. Even a scoff from my younger sister, Zoe, who never passed up a chance to ride my coattails and criticize the stitching. I smiled too. Or at least, I think I did. I'd practiced that smile in the mirror as a kid, when Dad would make jokes at my expense in front of dinner guests. It didn't reach my eyes then, and it sure didn't now. I let them take the photos. One with Mom and Dad on either side of me, their arms draped over my shoulders like they'd supported me all along. One with my boss, who'd stopped by to say a quick congratulations, looking visibly uncomfortable at the awkward tension in the air. One with Zoe, who leaned in and whispered, "Maybe now you'll finally stop acting like you have something to prove." I excused myself before dessert. No one followed. No one noticed. Or maybe they were too busy digging into tiramisu and clinking forks to care. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, gripping the wheel, trying to breathe normally. I didn't cry. I don't think I could have, even if I wanted to. I just felt hollow, like I'd thrown everything into this moment, only for them to hand me a punchline in return. 3 days passed in a weird haze. I avoided my phone, ignored texts from coworkers congratulating me again, from friends wanting to meet up and celebrate. I worked late and ate leftover takeout. Then came the call from Aunt Julie. "Lark," she said, her voice soft, almost guilty. "Your mom hasn't stopped crying." I didn't respond right away. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. "She thought you'd be happy," Aunt Julie continued. "She says she doesn't understand why you left. Why you didn't say goodbye. Your father, well, you know how he is. But your mother, she's taking it hard." That's when the guilt crept in, like a cold draft under a locked door. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd made the mistake of hoping things would be different. That this time, maybe they'd see me, not the projection of who they thought I was, or wasn't, but me. The kid who stayed up studying while they laughed at how I'd never survived the real world. The teenager who quietly started freelancing to pay for college applications they refused to fund. The adult who worked his way through internships, low-paying jobs, and burnout to land a role they didn't even understand. But maybe that's the thing about family. They remember you at your worst and hold you there. Forever. Aunt Julie tried to pivot the conversation to something lighter, asking if I'd come by next weekend for her birthday. But I mumbled an excuse and hung up. I knew I wasn't going. Not now. Maybe not ever. I should probably explain how we got here. Why my father, the man who was supposed to teach me how to believe in myself, thought the word lazy was the best way to honor my biggest achievement. Why my mother, sweet as she sometimes was, never stepped in. Why Zoe's words always landed like little knives. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow drip. Years of subtle digs, backhanded compliments, and dinners where the only thing on the menu was disappointment. Growing up, I was never the golden child. That was Zoe. Straight A student, cheer captain, fluent in 3 languages by 16, if you believe the way Mom told it. She was good at shining. I was quieter, obsessed with building things. Lego sets, model bridges, even cardboard cities when money was tight. While Zoe was winning trophies and giving speeches, I was in the garage turning scrap wood into miniature houses. But no one clapped for that. No one said, "Wow, Lark, you have such a creative mind." It was always, "Why don't you go outside like normal boys? Or stop wasting time on this nonsense?" The first time I got a job offer from an actual architecture firm, I brought home the letter with trembling hands, thinking, maybe now they'll see me. Dad glanced at the salary, raised an eyebrow, and said, "You'll still need to get a real job eventually." Zoe. She asked me if I just photoshopped it for attention. So I stopped sharing. Every success became mine alone. Every little win, a new project, a raise, an industry mention, I kept to myself. Until the promotion. I don't know what got into me. Maybe I was tired of carrying it alone. Maybe I thought things had changed. They hadn't. But something else had. Me. After Aunt Julie's call, I sat in my apartment, staring at my bookshelf. It was lined with models, awards, even a framed article that featured one of my designs. All earned. All real. And none of it ever mattered to them. So why was I still letting them take up space in my head? I didn't have an answer then. But I knew one thing. If they were going to make me the villain, the disappointment, the joke, fine. I could play that role. But on my terms. Quietly. Strategically. With the kind of precision only years of silent observation could teach. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't scream or post a dramatic Facebook rant. I'd let them keep thinking they had the upper hand. And while they reveled in their illusion of superiority, I'd start setting the stage. I didn't return any calls that week. Not from Aunt Julie, not from Mom, not even from Zoe, who had texted me 3 days later with a smug, "You coming to Julie's, or are you still mad about Dad's joke?" Still mad? That was how she framed it. A joke. Like being publicly humiliated at my own celebration was a harmless tease and not a deeply embedded symptom of years of being the family's designated scapegoat. But that was Zoe's role in our little family theater. She always knew how to twist the blade and call it just playing. I kept my distance. Work gave me an excuse. I threw myself into a new project at the firm, a modern community center that I'd pitched and gotten approved. I worked long hours, not because I had to, but because it kept me out of my apartment, away from the silence, away from the temptation to scroll through old photos and second-guess every memory. A week passed, then 2, and then came the voicemail. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. We haven't heard from you in a while. I hope you're not still upset about what your father said. You know how he is. He didn't mean anything by it. Anyway, Zoe's birthday dinner is next Friday. We're hosting it here. She'd love if you came. We all would." That was the thing. Every slight was forgiven without discussion. Every insult, swept under the rug with a smile and a passive, "You know how he is." But they never said that about me. When I didn't show up for something, I was selfish. When I set boundaries, I was dramatic. And when I stopped sharing good news, I was secretive. I didn't reply. I didn't plan to go to the birthday either. But then I got a message from my cousin Henry, who I'd always been close with. He was Zoe's age, but different. Calmer. Quieter. An observer like me. "Heads up, your name's on the invite list. Zoe said you're giving her something big. Everyone's talking." What? I read it twice. Then again. I hadn't bought Zoe anything. I hadn't even RSVP'd. Confused, I called Henry. "She told people you were giving her that signed rendering of the downtown project," he said. "The one from the newspaper article last year. Said you promised it to her back when you got promoted. That you owed her for all her support or something." I stood in the middle of my kitchen, stunned. That rendering was a one-of-a-kind piece. Framed. Signed by the city officials and design team. It was a recognition of the project's impact. The very project that had built my reputation. I'd worked on it for 11 months straight. And Zoe? She had once told me the whole thing looked like a glorified bus station. She was lying. Boldly. Publicly. Did she say that to Mom and Dad? I asked. Henry paused. "Your dad's the one who mentioned it first, actually. At Uncle Raj's poker night. Said he was glad you were finally showing some gratitude to your sister." Zoe just nodded. I felt something inside me splinter. I'd tolerated a lot over the years. The subtle jabs, the emotional neglect, the erasure of my accomplishments. But this was different. This was theft. Of my work, my pride, my narrative. I didn't respond to Henry. I didn't call Zoe. I just sat down at my desk, stared at the framed rendering on the wall, and tried to make sense of the weight in my chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the realization that no matter how far I'd come, they would always try to write my story for me. I should have confronted her then. But part of me wanted to see how far they'd take it. The birthday dinner arrived. I didn't plan on going. But then I thought, maybe I should. Maybe it was time to stop avoiding, stop hiding, and start watching closely. So I went. When I walked into the house, everything was exactly as I remembered. The hallway still smelled faintly of lavender and lemon polish. The photos on the wall hadn't changed. Zoe's graduation, Zoe at nationals, Zoe's first job, but none of me. Not even from my college graduation. My photo had been taken down years ago to make room. Mom greeted me at the door like I was a guest in a hotel. Polite, slightly distant. "Oh, Lark, you made it." I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure either, I said. She blinked at that, but didn't press. Zoe's in the living room. Everyone's here. The living room was packed. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. And at the center of it all, Zoe, wearing a glittery gold dress like she was hosting an award show. She grinned when she saw me. "There he is," she said, arms open wide. "The man of the hour." "Wait, what?" "Don't look so confused," she laughed. "I told everyone you had a surprise." There was a beat of silence, just long enough for heads to turn. Then the murmurs began. Someone asked if it was the rendering. Another said they couldn't wait to see it. Zoe beamed, basking in the attention. I played along. I walked over, gave her a side hug, and said, "Let's talk privately for a second." She hesitated. "Why? You didn't bring it." I just looked at her. She followed me to the hallway, out of earshot. "What are you doing?" I asked, quiet but firm. "Why did you tell everyone I was giving you my rendering?" She tilted her head. "I thought you were. You said you might, remember?" "No, I didn't." "Well, people already think you are," she said, arms crossed. "So if you don't, you'll just look petty." I stared at her, completely floored. She smiled, that same smile she used when we were kids, and she broke something of mine and blamed it on me. "Come on, Lark. It's just a picture. You've got the real thing, your job, your projects. Let me have this." Let her have this. I almost laughed. But instead, I said nothing. I just turned and walked back into the living room. An hour passed. I stayed silent, just observing. Watching Zoe hold court, watching Dad brag about how both his kids were doing well, even though he only ever mentioned her by name. Watching Mom glance over at me with that nervous flicker in her eyes, like she knew I was biding time. And then it happened. Someone asked Zoe about her plans. She launched into a rehearsed speech about how she was considering a move into design consulting and was so inspired by the kind of work Lark does. Then she gestured toward me. "He's the reason I started thinking about buildings differently," she said. "I used to think architecture was boring, but when I saw how he brought that whole community center to life." What was it called again? She knew the name. Everyone knew the name. It was on the news. It was printed under my photo in every article. But Zoe paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. I didn't. "Well, whatever it's called," she continued. "He gave me a framed piece of it, and I swear, I look at it every day. It's just stunning." That was the moment. The lie became public, cemented, and I saw Dad nod, proud. I saw Mom clap gently. I saw people smiling at Zoe, congratulating her for her connection to something she had nothing to do with. That's when I realized this wasn't just a mistake. It was a takeover. She was rewriting my story in front of me, and no one was stopping her. That night, I didn't take the rendering off the wall. I took it out of the frame, and I made copies, not to give to her, but to send somewhere else. I didn't sleep that night. After the party, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering across my living room walls like blinking warnings. The rendering lay on the coffee table, unframed, the paper slightly curled at the edges from being handled too much. I stared at it for hours. Not because of what it was, a milestone, a symbol, a trophy, but because of what it had become in someone else's mouth. A lie, a decoration, a prop for Zoe's fantasy. She had stolen more than a picture. She had stolen my moment. Again. But this time, it was louder. This time, It wasn't just the private dismissal, the quiet eye rolls, or the behind closed doors insults. She had done it in public, and they let her. All of them. Mom, who had nodded and smiled. Dad, who took credit for both of us as if he'd ever built anything but walls. And the relatives, who never questioned anything Zoe said because she knew how to make herself look like the sun. For a few days, I crashed emotionally. I wasn't ashamed to admit it. Not to myself, anyway. I didn't go into work. I didn't answer calls. My fridge was empty, but I didn't have the energy to go to the store. I ordered cheap food I barely touched and let dishes pile up in the sink. I watched the same 3 movies on a loop, not because I liked them, but because they asked nothing of me. I kept thinking of the birthday dinner. Her words. The applause. The way she turned the whole room with one smile and a made-up story. And I thought, maybe I deserved it. Maybe they were right all along. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I didn't do enough to earn the space I wanted in that family. But that voice, the one that had always been quiet, the one I buried under years of self-doubt, started to push back. Because deep down, I knew better. I had earned it. Every inch. Every sleepless night. Every drawing redlined at 3 a.m. Every team meeting where I pitched ideas no one else believed in until the models came to life. I hadn't coasted on charm or borrowed inspiration. I'd built my career from the ground up, brick by brick. And I wasn't going to let someone who'd never lifted a finger in my world claim my legacy. Especially not my sister. So slowly, I stood back up. I went back to work. I walked into the firm like I hadn't missed a day, and if anyone noticed the bags under my eyes or the way I kept to myself, they didn't mention it. I dove into the community center expansion project. Phase 2 was in the concept stage, and I asked to take the lead. No one argued. I'd earned that trust. Outside of work, I started reaching out to people who'd worked with me on past projects, to contacts I hadn't spoken to in a while. Not to gossip, not to complain, just reconnect. Remind them I was here. Remind myself I existed outside of my family's shadow. I also took the copies of the rendering and wrote a letter. Not to Zoe, not to my parents, but to the city's Department of Public Works. It was short, professional. I explained that I was the original designer behind the award-winning West Side Community Center and wanted to contribute framed, signed copies of the original renderings to hang in the newly approved satellite locations. It wasn't grand or flashy, just a quiet way to say, "This is mine." They said yes. They even asked if I'd speak at the groundbreaking ceremony for the next site. I didn't tell my family, not because I was hiding, but because I was done giving them front-row seats to my life if all they did was throw popcorn. Meanwhile, Zoe's design consulting career was getting louder online. She'd made a website, social media pages, even started offering remote consultations for small residential projects. She name-dropped my community center 3 times in the About Me section. She used phrases like collaborated with award-winning architects and instrumental in early design ideation. All vague enough to sound impressive, all lies. I took screenshots. Every single one. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with them, but I knew one thing. Truth has a way of revealing itself. Eventually. And I was patient. Mom called again a few weeks later. "Lark, honey, your sister said you've been distant. Is everything okay?" I paused, weighing my response. "I've been busy," I said. "Well, we were hoping you'd come to dinner this weekend. Just a small thing. Your father said you've been quiet lately." I almost laughed. Quiet? That's what they called self-preservation now. "I'm not coming," I said. There was a beat of silence on her end. I could picture her frowning, pressing her fingers to her temple like she always did when she didn't want to deal with something. "Lark, we're family. You can't just disappear because you're upset." "I'm not disappearing," I said calmly. "I'm just done pretending things are fine when they're not. You know your father didn't mean anything by that joke at the promotion dinner." "It's not just about the joke, Mom." "Then what?" I wanted to tell her everything. About Zoe's lies. About the rendering. About how they'd applauded a fantasy version of me while ignoring the real one for years. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew she wouldn't believe me. Or worse, she'd believe me and still side with them. So instead, I said, "I need space. That's all." She sighed. "Well, don't take too long. Your cousin Amelia's wedding is in a month. It would mean a lot to everyone if you came." I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I would be there. Just not the way they expected. In the meantime, things started to shift. Quietly. Slowly. People at work began asking for my input more often. A few colleagues mentioned how they'd seen me featured in an architecture blog about young innovators in public design. I hadn't even known I was in it. I was invited to guest speak at a university design class. The students were sharp. They asked questions about function and community equity and sustainable structures. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like what I said mattered. Not because it made someone else look good, but because it came from me. And through all this, I kept watching Zoe. She was getting bolder. At a small networking event, one of my old colleagues told me they'd met her at a mixer. Said she'd casually implied she had helped design the blueprint for the community center. She said you were close, he added. That you two collaborate a lot. I smiled. Not exactly. Zoe was playing a dangerous game, and she didn't know I had started keeping score. The fall was slow, but the rise? That was mine. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need the applause. I'd finally stopped trying to rewrite my place in their family story. Instead, I was writing my own. One without applause lines and punchlines. One with truth. One where I didn't flinch every time my phone lit up with my father's name. One where I didn't let my sister wear my skin like a costume. But the story wasn't over. Because just when I thought things had stabilized, when I'd carved out a quiet peace and found a rhythm, I got an email. From a publication. A big one. One I'd submitted a project featured months ago, with little hope of it going anywhere. Subject line. Feature approval. Final interview request. I opened it, heart racing. But halfway through reading, I stopped cold. Because they weren't asking to interview me. They were confirming a co-feature. With Zoe. Apparently, she'd reached out after hearing I submitted. Claimed to be my co-designer. And they believed her. For now, I closed the email. Sat back in my chair. And stared out the window. That night, I stared at the email for hours. Every time I read the lines. We're thrilled to feature your work, and Zoe mentioned she'd be happy to share insights from your collaborative design process. My jaw clenched tighter. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to respond, to correct the lie. But I stopped myself, because something had shifted. The old me, the version they all expected, would have either lashed out emotionally or backed away in silence, too tired to fight. But I wasn't that lark anymore. The fall had burned the indecision out of me, and the rise had taught me that revenge, when properly aged, is a meal best served not just cold, but carefully plated. And this time, I was the chef. I didn't respond to the email that night. I didn't respond at all, not yet. Because this was bigger than correcting a line in an article. This was about reclaiming everything she'd taken and making sure she could never take anything again. To do that, I needed two things, proof and patience. The next morning, I took the day off work and drove to the city planning department archives. They kept every project proposal, blueprint, sign-off sheet, and approval stamp on record. I knew that already. What I didn't know was whether Zoe had ever been stupid enough to attach her name to any part of my project on paper. If she had, even in a minor way, it could give her just enough plausible deniability to muddy the waters. But if she hadn't, well, then the truth would be in black and white. I spent 3 hours in that cold, fluorescent-lit room flipping through manila folders and digital PDFs. And there it was. Every sheet stamped with my name. Every permit signed by me and my supervisor. Every meeting note, every design iteration, every email, every municipal communication, mine. Zoe's name didn't appear once. Not even in a footnote. I scanned it all. Compiled it into a clean PDF with bookmarks and a table of contents. Then I created a new email draft and attached it. But again, I didn't send it. Not yet. Because exposing Zoe to the magazine would be satisfying, sure. But it would only be one flame in a much bigger fire I was planning to light. If I played this right, she wouldn't just lose the article. She'd lose the whole illusion. I made a list that night. Names of people who'd interacted with both of us. People I trusted. People I'd quietly drifted from because it was easier than confronting Zoe's manipulations. First on the list, Mira. She had been my best friend through college, and we interned together at my firm before she moved to another city. But she'd also grown up knowing Zoe. Back when we were younger, Mira had seen firsthand the way my sister treated me, how Zoe would borrow my ideas and present them to others, how she always made it sound like I needed her to translate my work to the world. I hadn't spoken to Mira in almost a year. Not because of anything bad, just time, life, and distance. But I sent her a message that night. Hey, I know it's been a while, I could really use your help with something. Do you have a few minutes to talk? She replied in 5. 10 minutes later, we were on a video call. I filled her in, slowly, carefully. I explained how Zoe had hijacked my promotion party, claimed the rendering as her gift, spun up a fake consulting career off the back of my work. And now, this article. Mira didn't interrupt. She didn't blink. She just leaned back, exhaled, and said, "She's always done this to you." That hit me harder than I expected, because it was true. And hearing someone else say it made me feel less crazy. I never thought she'd go this far, I admitted. She's always been this far, Lark. She just finally found an audience big enough to clap. We talked for over an hour. By the end of it, Mira had offered to write a formal statement confirming Zoe had no part in the community center design. She even offered to reach out to the article's editor herself, since she now worked in PR and had media connections. But again, I told her to hold off. I wasn't quite ready to trigger the avalanche. Not yet. Next, I called Henry, my cousin, my one honest link to the family web. I hadn't spoken to him since the birthday party, but he picked up instantly. "You okay?" he asked, voice quiet. "I'm getting there," I said, "but I need a favor." I explained what happened with the article, how Zoe had inserted herself into the publication feature and was building her brand off of my work. Henry wasn't surprised. In fact, he told me something that made my stomach turn. "She's planning to launch a course," he said. "Online design basics or something. Says she's going to use your community center project as a case study. Already filmed some promo stuff." "What?" I asked, stunned. "Where?" "She rented studio space. Said a friend from college is helping her produce it. Wants to call it design thinking, from concept to community." I let out a slow breath. That was the exact phrase I'd used in my last TDX-style talk. Word for word. "Can you find out where she's filming?" I asked. Henry hesitated. "You're not going to, storm the place, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm going to make sure it's the last place she ever lies." He texted me the address that evening. It was a small media studio in Midtown, one of those rented spaces that influencers use to film courses, reaction videos, or fake startup promos. I scoped it out the next day. Quiet, easy to access, nothing high security. She was filming again that Saturday, according to Henry. That gave me 3 days. I spent those days preparing. I went through every piece of evidence I had. The planning documents, the signed contracts, the timestamp drafts. I recorded a video walking through the entire process of the community center project, from the first concept sketches to final construction. I included timelines, photos of my meetings with city planners, interviews with team members, even drone footage from the day we opened the building to the public. And at the end, I looked directly into the camera and said, "Design is about solving problems. But the biggest problem I've faced wasn't a building. It was someone trying to build a career on top of my life's work." Then I reached out to the article's editor. I was calm, polite, professional. I told them there had been a misunderstanding, that Zoe had no involvement in the design project, and I had attached documentation to verify that. I didn't trash her. I didn't demand they remove her. I just asked that the feature reflect the truth. The editor responded the next morning. They thanked me for the clarification, said they'd be revisiting the story structure. And most importantly, they said they'd follow up with Zoe for a comment. I waited. Saturday arrived. I dressed in clean jeans and a dark jacket, tucked my rendering file folder under my arm, and made my way to the studio. I didn't go inside. Instead, I handed the front desk assistant a sealed envelope and a flash drive. "For Zoe," I said. "She's expecting it." She wasn't. Inside the envelope was a letter. No threats. No insults. Just a list of everything she'd claimed, alongside the evidence disproving each one. At the bottom, I added a line. "You always said I needed you to help tell my story. But the truth speaks just fine on its own." The flash drive? That was the video. The one showing the entire project timeline. The one that had already been shared privately with the magazine, the city's PR department, and several professional contacts who had begun noticing Zoe's name popping up in places it didn't belong. The one Mira was preparing to publish if Zoe didn't back down. I left the studio without waiting for a reaction, because I didn't need to see her fall to know it was already happening. But the real stage was still ahead. Amelia's wedding. A massive family gathering, where every relative, friend, and old acquaintance would be present. And Zoe? She'd planned to give a speech. A toast, according to Henry. About creativity. About legacy. about the people who inspired her most. I'd seen the draft. And guess whose name showed up 3 times? The wedding was next weekend, and I had already RSVP'd. Amelia's wedding was held at a country estate an hour outside the city, the kind of place that tried too hard to look effortless. Strings of white lights, manicured hedges, and waiters in black vests handing out overpriced finger food. I arrived early, not to mingle, but to settle in, to observe. I wasn't nervous. I felt steady, calm, like a chess player walking into the final match with every move already mapped. I wasn't here to start a fight. I was here to finish a story. Inside the reception hall, they'd arranged the tables in clusters, family up front, friends, and extended toward the back. My parents were already seated at the head table, Mom fussing with her necklace, Dad sipping white wine like it owed him something. Zoe hadn't arrived yet. When she finally entered, the entire room tilted. She wore a silver dress, floor-length, like she was the bride. Her hair was swept up in soft curls, her makeup flawless, her smile gleaming with curated humility. She made the rounds immediately. Air kisses, compliments, light laughter. And every so often, I saw her point discreetly in my direction, offering what I imagined was some charmingly false anecdote about our sibling bond. I kept to myself. Let her perform. She wouldn't be smiling long. The speeches started after dinner. Amelia's dad spoke first, emotional and endearing, followed by a heartfelt toast from her best friend. Then came Zoe's moment. She took the mic with the grace of someone who had practiced in front of her mirror for weeks. I wasn't sure I wanted to speak tonight, she began, faux modest. But when Amelia asked me to say a few words about creativity and inspiration, I thought, what better time to celebrate the people in our lives who help us build something meaningful? There it was, her pivot, her launchpad. I've always been fascinated by design, she continued, but it wasn't until I got to see the inner workings of a real project, the West Side Community Center, that I truly understood how transformative architecture can be. That experience, working closely with someone I admire, watching it go from sketch to structure, changed my life. She smiled in my direction, full of gratitude and subtlety. The room applauded gently. I've learned that buildings don't just house people, she said. They tell stories. And if you're lucky, you get to be part of one that makes a difference. It was elegant, polished, deceitful, and it was the last time she'd ever get away with it. After the applause faded and people returned to their conversations, I quietly approached the event coordinator, an older woman named Janice I'd met briefly when I arrived. I'd slipped her a small envelope earlier with a polite request and a flash drive. She gave me a quick nod now and began walking toward the A/V booth. The lights dimmed. The music cut. A new video began playing on the large reception screen. At first, people looked up with confusion. Was this a surprise slideshow? A tribute to the bride and groom? Then came the opening title. The Making of the West Side Community Center, a True Story. The room fell silent. It opened with aerial shots of the building, then blueprints, then footage of the first city meetings, me in a button-up and slacks, pointing to schematics, talking to council members. Narration overlaid. Design is about solving problems. But the biggest problem I've faced wasn't a structure. It was someone trying to take credit for mine. Gasps rippled across the room. Zoe, seated now, went stiff. The video laid everything bare. Timestamps, design files, email exchanges, photos of me presenting the project alone. No Zoe. Not even once. It was short, 3.5 minutes, but perfectly curated. Clear. Undeniable. Then came the kicker. A side-by-side comparison of my original TEDx quote, design thinking, from concept to community, and her course promo clip using the exact same phrase. Word for word. The video ended with my voice. You don't get to rewrite someone else's work and call it inspiration. You don't get to wear their legacy like a borrowed suit. The screen went black. Silence hung in the air like smoke. Then murmurs. Whispers. Heads turning toward Zoe. She stood abruptly. This is completely out of context, she stammered. He's twisting things. This isn't what it looks like. People didn't buy it. Because context wasn't necessary. The truth had been presented clearly, calmly, and with evidence. Her lie hadn't just unraveled. It had collapsed in front of everyone. She'd used it to elevate herself. My parents were frozen. Dad looked like someone had slapped him across the face. Mom stared at her half-eaten dessert like it might disappear. I didn't approach Zoe. I didn't need to, but she came to me. 20 minutes later, in the hallway outside the reception room, she cornered me. "What was that?" she hissed. I didn't answer. "You embarrassed me. In front of everyone." "No," I said. "You did that all by yourself." Her nostrils flared. "You've always been jealous." That made me laugh. Genuinely. Jealous of what, Zoe? That you can lie better than I can breathe? I was just trying to build something. With my foundation, I snapped. You built a house of mirrors and acted shocked when one broke. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She just turned and stormed down the hallway. I returned to the reception. Henry gave me a nod. Mira, who had shown up as my quiet +1, squeezed my hand under the table. And the bride? Amelia? She smiled at me with a kind of gratitude I didn't expect. Later that night, after the cake had been cut and the dance floor emptied, I walked out onto the estate's stone patio. The night air was cool, crisp, clean. My phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, revised article draft approved. It was from the magazine. They'd updated the feature to focus solely on my work. Zoe's name had been removed. No co-feature. No quote. No footnote. Just me. Alone. And for once, that didn't feel lonely. It felt right. Because I had finally told my own story. And they had no choice but to listen.